We're going to be in Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30, if you'd like to follow along. There are Bibles. There should be them under the chairs and maybe some in the back if you're looking for one, and we welcome you to grab one if you don't have one. So Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Last year, right before we set out to launch River Valley Church and go to every Sunday gatherings, I had a new experience. For the first time in 20 years in pastoral ministry, I took my first sabbatical, which is something that sort of goes along with pastoral ministry, and it's recommended to happen every 7 years. And for about 9 weeks, I ceased from my normal rhythms and my normal routines before heading into this new season, this new chapter of ministry. And one of the biggest pieces of my time away was doing some things that were out of the ordinary or new. So one of those was taking some much needed time away from this thing. Yeah. It was the first time in my entire adult life that I took time away from things like social media and a constant news stream and notifications and all of the things. Now, I will say that this was not an easy thing. When you've been doing something like that for so long and you've been in a routine and a rhythm of that steady stream, that pattern, that rhythm of being, it sort of identifies how you operate. And so it wasn't easy. At first, it was really hard. How will I keep updated, though? Who needs me right now? What is happening in the world? But let me just tell you something. After about a week, I kind of timed it to see when this would start maybe leveling out, if it did at all. After about a week into my sabbatical, something happened. I started noticing things around me. I became, I think, more present to my family. I wasn't burdened by the constant need to respond to everything. I felt, maybe for one of the first times in a digital world, I felt free. Those couple months of ceasing from my normal pace made me realize something about myself. One of the big things that I realized about myself that I knew beforehand, but even more so as I got into it, it was this: I don't know how to stop. And I'm guessing in a room like this today that I'm not alone in that. I didn't know how to stop. We live in a world that is addicted to motion. If someone asked you on any given day, how are you doing? The common response that's going to happen is this: good, really busy. Had it happen yesterday. I was talking to somebody here in town, and I was thinking to myself, I'm going to ask them how they're doing, and they're going to tell me, good, but really busy. Wouldn't you know? Hey, I'm guilty too. Things are good, really busy. It's how we make small talk, actually. Our calendars are full, our minds are racing, and our souls are exhausted. And yet Jesus says something stunning in Matthew chapter 11. He says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. And you will find rest for your souls. Soul rest. When's the last time you thought about that? Rest for your soul. That phrase, rest for your souls, it might be the most countercultural promise in our generation. Because most of us, we don't know how to rest. I didn't know how to rest. I still struggle with resting. We only know how to collapse. But Sabbath, the rhythm of stopping and resting, isn't just an idea for the overworked. It's one of the oldest spiritual rhythms in all of Scripture. It's a command, it's a gift, and it's an act of trust. And today, I want to spend our time today and next week talking about, as part of our rhythm series, talking about Sabbath rest. Rest for your soul. The first point when it comes to the idea of Sabbath is that Sabbath shows us that we can stop. This is what I needed to figure out early on in my sabbatical, that Sabbath and what's built into this idea, this concept, is just simply the idea of stopping. Stopping. Genesis chapter 2, verse 1 through 3 famously says this: "Thus the heavens and the earth were finished," all done, "and all the host of them. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all of his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day, and he made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation." There's a Hebrew word, the word Shabbat, which literally means to stop. It means to cease, to be done, Shabbat. Before there was sin in the world and brokenness, before God had to give the Israelites the 10 Commandments, before there were deadlines, guess what? There was a Sabbath. There was a Sabbath. There was a rhythm that was baked into creation itself. 6 days of work, 1 day of rest. And notice that God didn't rest because he was somehow tired. He rested because he was actually satisfied. Sabbath is God's way of saying, you, and I don't know who needs to hear this today, but I think it's pertinent. You are not a machine. You are my child if you were in Christ. And I want you to stop long enough to remember that. To remember that. I've shared this illustration before, but I think it's so good. But in the mid-1800s, hundreds of thousands of Americans headed west on what's known as the Oregon Trail in search of a new life. And in the early 90s, hundreds of thousands of Americans, myself included, relived this through a computer game. Well, do you know what it's called? The Oregon Trail. I was famous for getting dysentery on the trail. But did you know that the best case scenario for someone going out on the Oregon Trail to make it, now the Oregon Trail started in Independence, Missouri, and it ended in Oregon City. How many actually made it to Oregon City to see that? Not many of us. Well, in real life, the best case scenario is that this journey was about 5 to 6 months. It was a journey for the colonial era, but with many hazards and setbacks along the way. As I said, I got dysentery all the time, but they faced things like scarlet fever. You were trying to cross that river, and all of a sudden your whole crew drowns. And it would take sometimes entire units of people a year to go from one place to the next in Oregon City. There was a religious group of settlers that decided to take on the Oregon Trail. And as part of their faith, they decided that they were going to observe a Sabbath rest along the way on this journey. And so as they traveled, every Saturday night, they would stop and make camp. And they would not pick back up traveling until Monday morning. It was a rhythm, it was a ritual, and a routine for them. But as summer came to an end, they started to realize, they were now under some pressure, right? We're starting to feel that now, right? The effects of summer coming to an end. The cold is beginning to happen. It stays darker earlier, right, in the morning. I think I noticed that for the first time today, just how dark it was. I got up pretty early, and I was like, wow, it's still dark out? Man, they were determined that they needed to make it to Oregon City, so they decided to give up on their pattern. They decided to give up on their Sabbath rest, and they decided instead of taking a break, we're going to just push through because we've got to make up time. We've got to get there. And it could get treacherous for our travel, and we just need to be done with our Sabbath routine. Well, eventually they found themselves in a disagreement. And part of the group decided that they just needed to keep going and press on. And another half of the group decided, you know what? We're going to stick to our rhythm. We're going to stick to our plan. We're going to stop and rest to observe the Sabbath. And so because they couldn't come to a resolution, they split up the group. Half the camp went forward, half the camp stayed behind at a slower pace. Can you guess which group made it to Oregon first? The Sabbath keepers. The people who decided that we need to stop, we need to rest. God created it this way. We're not machines. In our world, we don't stop because part of the reason is we don't trust that the world will keep spinning without us. We think that if we don't check that email, if we don't respond, it won't get done. If we don't post that update, people will forget about us. But Sabbath whispers the opposite message in a busy world and says, you are not what you produce. You are not what you produce. Marva Dawn once said, we don't keep Sabbath to make us more efficient for the rest of the week. We keep it to resist the idol of efficiency itself. How many of you have ever thought about the idea of efficiency being an idol? That was a new one for me, a new way to think about this. Anything that is good can become an idol. Any thing can become an ultimate thing in your life. And my posit to you today is, if that thing is not Jesus elevating to a place in your life, then you will quickly take any good thing in your life and you will make that your functional savior, including efficiency in what you do. Friends, God shows us from the fabric of creation itself that we can and we should stop. We should. Difficult, but possible. The second thing that we learn when it comes to Sabbath rest is trust. So not only do we have to stop, we actually have to cease, Shabbat, but we have to trust. Deuteronomy chapter 5 in the Old Testament, verse 12 through 15, spells out sort of where we come up with the idea of Sabbath rest as given to the people of Israel. Here's what it says. Observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. Notice the command part. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God, and on it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter or your male servant or your female servant or your ox or your donkey or any of your livestock or the sojourner who is within your gates, that your male servant and your female servant may rest as well as you. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. As we saw earlier, the Sabbath originated in creation. God made the world in 6 days, and it says he rested on the seventh day. Not because he was tired, but because he was satisfied with his work. And when he rescued the nation of Israel out of slavery in Egypt, he commanded them to keep the Sabbath holy. Now, to the Israelites, this was a radical shift. See, as Americans, we hear the word Sabbath and we think bummer. I don't know about you, if this was something that you grew up with or you practiced, but my parents, God bless them, they thought Sabbath meant you need to take a Sunday nap. It also meant that you couldn't lift a finger on Sunday, You had to be a certain place, a certain time, and there was zero amount of work or, even play at times that you could do. Come to since realize that, Sabbath is actually way more than those kinds of things. But when the people of Israel heard about a Sabbath rest, they were not thinking, bummer. They were thinking, oh my goodness, amazing. These people were enslaved. The Israelites were enslaved to the Egyptians, and then God comes and gives them a new law and says, actually, I'm commanding you to take a break, a rest. You know, the idea is that at that time, they had no time off. They had no sick days. There was no PTO. There was no union organization, no negotiation, no vacation, no days off. Their reality was work every day, all the time. And here God comes and he says, I've got really good news for you. It's I want you to take a day off. I want you to take a break, a day to rest, a day to worship, a day to enjoy life. Yet the Sabbath was also a test of their trust. Would they believe that God would provide in 6 days what they could earn in 7? Would they believe that God would be faithful to them even in losing a day? When Israel was in the wilderness, and they traveled around the wilderness because they oftentimes got themselves into trouble, so it was 40 years in the wilderness of traveling around, grumbling and complaining, going through this mantra of obedience and disobedience and obedience and disobedience for 40 years. It wasn't until the 40th year that they came into the land of promise. So for 40 years they were in the wilderness. It says that God sent manna, daily bread. We use that phrase today in our prayer. But he told them not to gather on the 7th day this manna. And why do you think he did that? He actually told them, do not gather the manna that I will give you on the 7th day. Why did he do that? To teach them to trust. If they gathered too much manna, it would spoil, right? Like you get it all together and it would go bad. But if they stopped and God continued to provide it, they would have just what they needed. They would trust that God could provide in 6 days what they could provide in 7. It was an act of trust. An act of trust. How much more the people of Israel needed to take a break, commanded by the Lord, do we in our 21st century American hustle and bustle need to also follow suit, not as a curse, not as a holding you back from your greatest potential, but also because the God of the universe baked it into the fabric of creation. And that's how he's designed you to take a break. Anybody ever think about Chick-fil-A? Like me, like every other day? I have been known to drive out of my way to get to a Chick-fil-A. Everybody knows, though, that Chick-fil-A's are closed on Sundays, right? I think Kanye West made that famous, if I'm not mistaken. Closed on Sundays. You're my Chick-fil-A. Anyway, he's crazy. We can just acknowledge that, and yet it's ringing in my head over and over and over again. When my kids were little, that was like their song to sing, right? Closed on Sundays. Think how much money Chick-fil-A leaves on the table every week because they do not open on Sunday. Think about it. Think about the craze of Chick-fil-A. And you know, it's popular here, but like think about in the South, there's like one on every street corner. There's probably more Chick-fil-A's than there are churches in the South. I'm going to look up that stat, somebody. Look it up and let me know. I bet you. Now, regardless of how you feel about Chick-fil-A, I think we can all agree that their business model is a significant act of trust. I mean, they started out this way. Not when they just hit the boom, but every Sunday, unlike any other sort of business in the fast food industry, and yes, they are fast food, just want to reiterate that, they take a day off. That's crazy, crazy. To say that we're going to just be open just 6 days, that's a significant act of trust on their part. And throughout the Old Testament, Israel's obedience to the Sabbath was a litmus test for their faithfulness. Keeping the Sabbath signified a life truly, truly centered upon God. They were given the opportunity to test God to see if he would remain faithful to them, even when one less day was given in work. How about you today? Will you continue to let your worth be defined by your production, by your performance, by people's expectations? In their time, Pharaoh said, work harder. In our time, our culture says, do more. Jesus says, come to me and I will give you rest. The rest that you're looking for, the rest for your soul that you might not know you need today. Maybe soul rest is a new concept to you. I'm here to say that that can only be found in Jesus Christ. He's the only one that offers you true rest for your soul, and you so desperately need it. When Jesus says, come to me and I will give you rest, he isn't talking about taking a nap. Because rest is not found in a hammock. Rest is found in a person. Jesus is talking about shalom, another Hebrew word that means peace. Wholeness of body and soul, holistic peace. When we rest, we remember that God is God and we are not. And that is what Sabbath is for. Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. It's given to us as a gift to partake in and to see that God is who he says he is, and you are who you are, and that is a limited person. I want to talk just as we wrap up our first look at Sabbath. We'll get back together next week. We'll also take another drive by Sabbath because this is super important. And as a church, we want to begin to practice Sabbath rest as a rhythm in our life. And I suspect that we're not going to be able to go whole hog on this today. My suspicion is that we're going to have to take steps towards Sabbath. Because our culture has literally programmed us to not know what this means. We don't have the ability. So now we're going to have to take some baby steps back to what Jesus has actually called us to do. And this is how I think we could do that this week. This is some practical things that you could do this week to make Sabbath, beginning to make Sabbath a priority and a pattern that will provide you the rest that Jesus is talking about. And here's just a small caveat. I think, as we've talked about in this series, as that water of Sabbath rest drips in your life, that water will carve out the stone. If you've been here from the beginning, we've been talking about that. That caverns are not made overnight. That waterway caverns that we talked about earlier in the series that are carved out in the stone that didn't just happen overnight. That was the long, slow drip that shaped those rock formations into smooth caverns. That's what we're hoping that Jesus will do for us in Sabbath rest as we take steps, as we walk in this. So here's a few things. First of all, pick your rhythm. The idea here is that you might have to start small, start small. Maybe start with half of your day to cease from what you would normally do on any given moment that you'd have a time to rest. And it doesn't have to be a Sunday. I mean, I think sometimes we think, Sunday, that's God's holy day. Well, I think for the people of Israel who are under a different covenant under the law, I think it's a little different for us now. Some of us work on Sundays, okay? Some of us are involved on Sundays, and so Sunday can't be our Sabbath. But where could be? You're still designed to take a break. So where will that happen? Maybe think about a half day or an evening that you take to just rest. See, I think more than anything else, God honors our intention more than the specifics. He honors the intention. We're talking about intentionality when it comes to Sabbath rest and creating a new way of being, a new rhythm. Second, You need to prepare for resistance. Prepare to be met with resistance in this. Because guess what? Nobody cares about Sabbath rest in our current day and age. Nobody. They want you. They want your attention. They want your productivity. They want everything you've got, and they'll leave you with a soul that is longing for rest. So be prepared. Be prepared for resistance. Be prepared, and that might be in the form of a notification. Both external and internal forces will fight against your rest, your intentionality. Don't give up. Fight the fight of rest. Third, begin to create rituals. What do I mean by that? Well, one thing that you might consider doing, similar to what I did during a Sabbath rest, was there were times that I would power off my phone. Like quite literally, I would shut it down. Yes, even your group chat will survive. You can do it. I know you can, because I did. Share a meal with someone. Invite someone over to share a meal with. Pray with your family. Maybe that's not something that you regularly do. Maybe it's a new ritual that God wants to lead you in to mark Sabbath rest. Mark the beginning and the end of Sabbath with something meaningful, something beautiful. We started doing table talk devotions with our family. And we're not perfect at it. My kids will attest. And sometimes there's a little grumbling and complaining that goes with it. But you know what? You as a parent are being called to be the spiritual leader of your home. And we're called to be the main disciplers of our kids. So guess what? They're getting discipled by the world every single day. Every single day, they're receiving a message that is not Jesus. It's our job to instruct them in the way of Jesus as parents. Something to think about. And then finally, rest with purpose. We're not talking about taking time off for the heck of it. We're talking about resting on purpose, actually intentionally taking a break. Here's how you might think about doing that. A little extra sleep. Man, I went to bed last night, probably earlier than I have in a long time. And I woke up early this morning, dark outside, but I felt refreshed. So to all my night owl friends in here, you can do it. You can do it. Try to go to bed a little earlier. Find time to, like even today, we're spending time in worship. Find time to laugh with friends and family, to take a walk. Imagine that, taking a walk without a phone to distract you on it. Breathe. What a beautiful time of year to just enjoy what we have here in New England. Enjoy the world that God has made. So pick your rhythm. Pick a new rhythm, maybe half a day, maybe an hour. Whatever it is, God honors your intention. Prepare that there are gonna be forces, both internal and external, that fight you on it. Create a new ritual, a new way of doing something. And finally, rest with purpose. Be intentional about why you're resting. Maybe today you've gathered with us today and you've realized that your life actually has no rhythm. You just realize that. You're like, epiphany moment, I don't have any of that. It's okay. I'm glad you're here. We're on a journey to figure out what it looks like to live into these rhythms so that we can practice the way of Jesus together. This is why we're here. Maybe today you realize your life has no rhythm, that you've been sprinting without stopping. Maybe you've been running on empty for a long time, trying to control everything in your life, fearing that something might fall apart if you let it go. Today, I think God invites you to trust him enough to stop and trust what he's doing, to know that the world will keep spinning. The world will keep going. He's not asking you to be lazy. He's asking you to be loved.